You know, on Saturday Night Live, they were always making fun of Regis and Kathy Lee for reaching for their coffee cups.
Did they
And I
really?
think they even had like giant coffee cups making fun of them for how much they. So I think of that each time one of us gets a coffee cup.
Well, you know what? One of our early videos that we did together had giant coffee cups. We didn't mean for it to.
Oh my gosh, it was horrible because we were recording with like
With an iPhone.
an iPhone.
Yeah, we didn't have the center camera.
Yeah.
So we only had two cameras at the time, so we had the iPhone there, and the phones just looked like ginormous. They were this large. It was like drinking out of a gallon
It
jug.
was bad.
You know, I was thinking, I was going back. I know this sounds crazy because we put out the dance videos back in July. We started putting those out
we did.
in July.
It's a long time ago.
But I was going back through those again because they are so good. The content in them is just so wonderful. And you really can't get enough of going through that process, especially for somebody like me who is not going through it daily or weekly with clients like you.
Right.
I mean, it's always fresh on your mind. And it's so easy for me to forget it.
Yeah, it is.
So I was going back through parts of the dance and I was thinking, you know, I thought it might be nice to just go ahead and put all of those segments together.
That's a great idea, actually.
So that if you want to listen to it all, you can listen to it all. If you want to go and have a coffee session, 5 different sessions, and listen to us talking before each one of the segments, then go through each level.
Yeah, so some folks want it in
Separately.
5 segments, and some folks want it all at once, maybe.
Yeah, so I think that we'll go ahead and publish that. And that's what this is about. We want to share the entire dance with you. So it's going to be a lengthy video, but if you want to catch it all at once without any breaks in the middle, this video is for you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Tabletop Coffee. This is my friend Chuck Rogers. I'm Keith Dunn. And together we are Tabletop Coffee. We are bold.
And never, ever bitter.
Yeah. And the dance is definitely one that is not bitter. It helps you to see all of these different ways of dealing with things that come up in your relationship.
Yeah. This is one of those pieces that I couldn't imagine doing my personal life or my professional life without. And I know you said that, you know, I keep it fresh in my mind. It is in my mind, but I don't always practice it like I want to and need to.
Yeah.
But this is one of those pieces that I could not do my professional or personal life without. All right, so let's start D, A, N, C, and E. First of all, the masters really know how to dance. So D stands for directly turn toward as opposed to turn away. This is what you want in your relationship is emotional, relational intimacy. You want this closeness in your relationship. What you don't want is emotional, relational distance in your marriage. Okay. But since this comes upon you in your marriage, since it comes upon me in my marriage, and since it comes upon every couple, you better know what to do with it. And so the first thing that has to happen is that somebody in the relationship has to directly turn toward the other person. Notice I did not say some bodies have to turn toward. It's really super cool when you have both people kind of turning toward, but it's not really necessary. What is important is that somebody goes ahead and turns toward.
So what does a turn toward look like?
Yeah, a great question. It can be really overt, just like you said.
Ethan, can I talk to you about something real quick?
Just that blatant, or it can be really, really subtle. And sometimes it can be so subtle that if you're not looking for it, you'll miss it.
Okay.
For instance, let's say that it's late afternoon, both husband and wife are home, and a fight happens, an argument.
Sure.
Let's say that he says, "Hey, I'm out of here. I'm going to go for a walk. Be back in a half an hour."
Okay.
And she says, "Fine." And that would be really good, actually, that he says what he's going to do, where he's going to go, and how long he's going to be gone. So let's just say he does that right. So he leaves. And then he's gone, and she's settling in. and which is talking about deflooding, which we can talk about in a different video as well. You know, you got to eat. So she says, well, the evening is progressing, so I guess I can begin some type of meal preparation. So let's say that she begins to cook. He comes home and walks in, and she says, hey. He says, hey. She says, got dinner going, steaks on the grill. He says, yeah, I know. Smells good. She says, would you like some salad with your steak? He says, yeah. Salad sounds good, thanks. That's a turn toward.
Okay.
It is.
So you're making polite conversation.
Yes. Nothing has been fixed yet.
No.
Nothing has been solved or repaired. But it's taking yourself from where you are and turning toward in hopes that the other person will turn back toward, so that a facilitation of repair can be begun. Now, if you could go back and listen to that again, and maybe listen between the lines, I'm going to put some suggestions in there of what I think was written in between those lines. So he comes home, and she looks up and she says, hey, I think it was probably written in there, glad you're home. Hey, good to be home. Got dinner going, steaks on the grill. Sure hate what happened. Yeah, I know. Smells good. I really hate what happened too. Would you like some salad with your steak? I think I can do a better job. Yeah, salad sounds good, thanks. I'm quite sure that I can do it better. I think that was probably kind of written in between the lines there.
I think it would be written between the lines too. Is that a better way to break the ice, communicating in that way, because those two people know each other well enough that you know that they're trying to break those barriers down? They're both trying to break the barriers down.
Yeah, because they love this and they hate this. And some couples get so good at it that they love this so much and hate this so much that even while the argument is going on, they're already trying to turn toward. Let me give you a real life example. This is many, many years ago now. I was working with this couple, and their relationship was very conflictual. And it was kind of like an emotional, relational CPR. Every time they'd come in, I was pumping life back into it. At times he'd work hard, at times she'd work hard, at times nobody'd work hard. At times they both kind of work hard together, but they stayed with it and got some traction and began to move forward. And it started doing better. And then I lost track of them. This was even back before cell phones. And so occasionally they would come to mind. And one time they came to mind, and I was by a phone. And so I pulled out their file and called their home number. And I said, "This is Chuck. I was just calling to check on you guys, see how you're doing." And she says, "Oh, Chuck, it's so good to hear from you." And I said, "Well, good. Yeah, I just really was thinking about you guys. And I just happened to be by a phone and thought I'd call and see how you're doing." And I said, "So how are you guys doing?" And she says, good. And I said, "How are you doing?" And she says, "No, we are doing well." She said, your call caught me off guard and your question caught me off guard. And I was thinking about it because just yesterday we had a fight. And she said it was early in the morning. We were both kind of getting ready for our day. In the bedroom was where it took place. I don't even remember what it was about. She said he stomped off to the basement. And she said, I didn't know what else to do, so I just continued to make the bed. She said about 3 minutes later, I hear him coming up the stairs. And he stopped in the doorway. And she said, I had the comforter in my hand. I look up, and then he says to me, "I don't think I liked the way I said that." And she said, "I don't think I liked it either." And then she says to me, "Chuck, remember when it took 3 days to do that?" She said, "I think 3 days to 3 minutes is success.
Absolutely.
And I
it
said,
is.
I think you're right. Because Lynchburg only has 1 degree of separation, I have intermittently seen them over the years in town.
Okay.
And always just one of them. To begin with, it was a child or 2 in tow. I think they've had more children since our sessions were done. But one of the things that they learned to do super well was this turn toward. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a couple who was doing really well, and I said, what was one of the triggers? What really happened that kind of turned it around? And the guy says, for me, he said that was that turn toward thing. And he said, she really does it better than I do. He said, but I'm really doing it as well now. And it's just, it's the beginning of a process that starts the facilitation of repair. So directly turn toward as opposed to turn away.
So is there a certain amount of time between the time that you have the argument and the time that should be a turn toward?
Possibly.
Is there ever a bad time to turn toward?
Yes. So let's make another video about that one.
Okay.
It's talking about when people get flooded.
Oh, that's the flooded.
That's the flooded part, yeah. So
Okay.
that's another whole video.
Oh.
Definitely a great one. So that's D, directly turn toward as opposed to turn away. Good question.
Okay. So just for my information, the flooded, just real quick, is when it's really just overload and you need that time to decompress and think through that process and let that anger level drop to where you're able to think properly.
Usually your heart rate gets above 100.
Right.
And if your heart rate goes above 100, your brain goes offline and you can't think straight. And so your IQ drops, the other person's IQ drops. So basically you have 2 impaired people.
We've talked about that multiple times.
Trying to have a conversation.
And it's just impossible.
It is.
It just keeps getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah, and you'll say stuff, and the other person will say stuff that then you have to repair for those comments.
But the flooded has nothing to do with this dance thing at all. That's a separate thing altogether.
It's a separate piece, but we do teach about it. So this piece, the dance, is wonderful, but if you're too flooded, you can't do it.
Well, I think that's something that people will love and will need to know. So if you are wondering if there is a bad time or a time where you shouldn't turn or it's too fast, watch the video we have on flooded. That will give you some answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So that's D, directly turn toward as opposed to turn away. A is accepting of your partner's influence as opposed to being defensive. That's all A stands for.
Okay.
That's
Accepting of your partner's influence.
As opposed to being defensive. My natural instinctive response, I have to say, when my wife Kim comes to me and gives her complaint, which we'll talk about in a minute, is to throw up some form of defensiveness, to somehow, some way wiggle out and prove how wrong she is and how right I am. I work really hard to not do it, but that's my default. My mind, starts to go there.
That's a typical default for most people, though.
It
because
is.
we don't want to be blamed. None
No.
of us do.
No.
We don't want the finger pointed at us, whether we're wrong or whether we're right.
True. And a lot of couples, sometimes it's really subtle, but sometimes it's very overt. It's like, no, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. Yes, you do. Tit for tat, banter for banter. Or they'll receive it, but it's like, yeah, I do that, but you do it more. Or, yeah, I do that, but why do you think I do that? Or, yeah, I do that, but I can't believe you're bringing this up after what you did last week, last month, or last year. All some form of defensiveness. My only job when my spouse comes to me with a concern is to sit with open hands and receive her influence. And that's really, really tough to do.
Is acknowledgement built into that as well, to acknowledge what she's saying?
Yeah, it is. And sometimes it's you may not understand it, but to simply be able to say, I would imagine what you're saying is true, but I'm just not following it right now, so I'm not tracking with it. So if you would, just kind of go ahead and help me understand where you're coming from, because I really want to get on board with you. So it's just that good attitude piece.
Right.
What I teach my couples is that when your spouse complains about you, they're right.
Okay.
That's really hard for people to swallow. It was for me when I first started hearing about this information, because I keep thinking, well, Kim's like so wrong about like everything. So, so how in the world is she right about what she's complaining about? Well, the problem is that we don't really we don't know what we look like. We don't know what we sound like. We don't know
That's
how we're
true.
coming across. And so my default, I'm trying to make my default that when Kim comes to me, I just receive what she says. I really want to be changed by her influence.
Think of them as well thought out suggestions.
So when I first started hearing about this information, I'm like, okay, I want a great marriage, and I work with a lot of couples. So there's got to be some truth in this, So here's what I'll do. The next time Kim comes to me and complains about something and gives her complaint in a way that can be heard, hopefully, I'll just look, she's not an idiot. So there must be at least a grain of truth in what she's talking about.
Oh, sure.
So I'll be really benevolent. I'll find that grain of truth. And so I set out on that. I'm not real proud of that, but I'll set out on that mission to try to find that grain of truth. And then what I realized was that when I agreed with the grain of truth, I was not really agreeing with the grain of truth. I was agreeing with the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And I just couldn't see the rest. It was there. I just couldn't see it at the moment because I was caught up in my own stuff, in my own head and in my own heart. So what I found is that it was just easier to just say, babe, share more with me about where you're coming with that. I really want to get on board with you.
That's great advice.
Yeah, it really makes bad things small, and a lot of times it'll even just make it go away. Just really being present for your spouse and truly hearing what it is they have to say.
Good.
So that's
really-
accepting of your partner's influence as opposed to being defensive. N is being nurturing as opposed to having contempt.
Okay.
Being nurturing as opposed to having contempt. So let's talk about what contempt is to begin with. Contempt is this kind of an internal disdain that you have for your partner. It's not just disagreement. It's not even just maybe an unkind word. It really is a downward looking upon them.
So it's more of a you're better than they are, or you know better than they do?
Yeah, well, not only that, I know better than you, I know more than you, because you don't matter. So it's actually a devaluing of them. And the Gottmans were even able to measure when one person has contempt for the other person. One of the ways is that there's a muscle in the jaw that becomes taut, like this. And John says it actually happens more with the left side than the right. So you make a dimple.
Okay.
Or an eye roll, this kind of thing. Or if there's a lot of contempt, it's kind of a jaw pull, eye roll, with a sigh in between.
Okay.
When I was first learning this information, this research, I was like, well, how am I doing? Directly turn toward as opposed to turn away. At that time in our relationship, I was a fast turn toward because I love this and I hate this, so I really want to repair quickly. And so actually I would turn toward quickly, but I had to change my approach because Kim at that time turned more slowly than me. And so what would end up happening was I would end up kind of aggressively chasing her to try to make her repair,
Right.
which didn't make her feel safe at all and didn't hasten the repair. It actually made it longer. So I knew I needed to change my approach and back off on
Right.
that some.
That makes sense.
Accepting of Kim's influence as opposed to being defensive, I knew I needed to do that differently because I was just too defensive, usually in a kind of a subtle way, but I really wasn't receiving her influence and looking at the world through her glasses or putting on her moccasins and walking in them. I feeling the pebbles in her shoes. I just wasn't doing that. So I knew I needed to be better at accepting her influence. But this one, I was like, I got this one.
Nurturing.
Nurturing, yeah.
Yeah, I've got this.
Yeah, I love her. She's great. I don't look down on her.
But then you throw the contempt in the mix and you really see how evil and what it is.
Exactly. I mean, one time we were in our current home, I know right where we were, in our kitchen. I was facing her, she was facing me, and her back was toward the steps. No, I didn't push her down.
I was wondering.
No. No. And we were having this conversation. It was tense. And I was good eye contact, good head nods, as a good counselor husband should, And I'm just staying kind of tuned in externally. And on the inside, I'm thinking, yeah, I just can't wait until you shut your pie hole, because this is stupid. I mean, I was thinking it was just ignorant what she was saying. And I just continued to stay tuned in. And then I turned and walked away when it got to that place in the conversation. And I went,
I just did it.
I was devastated.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you have contempt for her.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't done being in denial. I keep a can of denial salve right here on my hip. And so I rubbed it on my heart, and I was like, wow, you don't really have contempt for her. You have contempt for her idea. And then I had to get real with myself and say, Kim is her ideas are her. You can't really separate the two. But I wasn't done yet. I was like, well, you do have contempt for her, but you were really good. You stayed tuned in. There's no way she could pick up on that. And then I had to get really real with myself again and say, do I think that small of her? Do I think that little of her, that she's so stupid that she can't pick up on when I have contempt for her?
Right.
No, I did have contempt for her, and it was hurting her, and it was hurting our relationship, and so I really had to work on that piece. And one of the things that they found out is that contempt in a relationship is a major predictor of medical illness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's huge. So it's emotional and relational, but it affects the physical as well. Yeah. So
Well,
it's got to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how long did it take before you were able to process fully that piece of contempt that you had in your heart?
I think it's been so many years ago now, but I think it was just a few minutes, because it was so on me at the time. It just hit me. I was embarrassed, actually, to think, I caught myself doing that. I have contempt, for her, and I don't want to have contempt for her. I don't want that to affect her or me or our relationship. So you have to find a way to value the other person in the midst of the disagreement.
What great advice.
Yeah, it is.
If we can always place value on the other person above ourselves, we could probably stay away from a lot of these disagreements.
Absolutely. So that's N, D-A-N-N-C. C is giving your concern in a way that can be heard by the other person. John, actually, in the earlier teachings, he calls it being able to give your complaint to the other person. He said everybody in the relationship has to have the right to complain. And I think that's a little bit harsh.
Right.
But in the later videos, later teachings, he talks about you must complain, but you must do it without blame. And we'll do another video about that as well. So you've got to be able to give your concern in a way that can be heard. Here's the thing about it. Not only must you say it in a way that can be heard, but you got to say it. It's not an option to not give your concern to the other person.
So what do you mean by that? How do you go forward with that?
Oftentimes in a relationship, there's at least one person that doesn't want to complain. They don't want to give their concern.
Okay.
My tendency is to kind of become inward and withdraw. And there's usually at least one person, sometimes both people are withdrawers as well. And this is especially true, I think, for couples who have had a lot of marital conflict, and maybe they're working on it on their own, or maybe they're coming in for counseling and they start getting some traction under their belt and doing well. So you like the peace, you like the connection that you're having, and then your spouse will say something that's hurtful, and you're like, I should probably complain about that, but man, we're doing so well. It feels so good. I love what we have, and I hate what we had before. That I'm going to give him a pass. I'm not going to say anything about that. And it's very well intended. So you gunny sack that one away. And then
until next time.
He'll say something again that's hurtful, and you're like, I should probably say something because that was painful for me. But we're doing so well, and I hate what we had before and love what we had now, so I don't really want to rock the boat. And so you gunny sack that one away. And then this process continues. And then what will happen with that is that will either explode or erode, both ending in distance. So
Sure,
what
well.
I tell my couples is, I said, well, you may be, because sometimes people will say, well, especially if somebody's had bad behavior, they've been a really difficult spouse to be with, or maybe one person has had an affair, and that person maybe is the guilty person who's had the affair, so to speak, might think, oh, after what I did, I don't have a right to complain. So what I tell that person is, well, first of all, I don't agree with you, but let's just pretend that you're right. Let's pretend you don't have a right to complain, but you have a responsibility to complain. You have a responsibility to yourself, you have a responsibility to the other person, and you have a responsibility to the relationship. Because if you don't give your concerns in a way that can be heard, you will explode or you will erode, both ending in distance. So it's not an option to sit back and not complain. You've got to complain.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, it can be anything.
Okay.
It can be that maybe my wife says something to me that maybe is true, but she uses harsh tones.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Or a loud volume. So I might want to say, hey, can you say that differently? That didn't feel very good to me. That would be a complaint with a request to how to do that differently. Or,
Okay.
Hey, can you, could you put your clothes in the hamper? I would really like that. As opposed to just continuing to be steamed and then, pick them up and put them in the hamper yourself. So anything that doesn't feel good, you give your complaint in a way that can be heard. So that's D, A, N, and C. So those are the four things that the master couples do over and over and over again.
Okay.
The last one is E, which is an emotional relational connection at the heart during conflict. E is an emotional relational connection at the heart during conflict. Now, as I was listening to these trainings over and over again, John says that this is the thing that keeps couples together, is having this connection. I kept rewinding, and I couldn't get it. And it was really upsetting to me. As I was learning this material, I'd be sharing it with Kim, and sometimes I think she was interested, and sometimes she was probably, being a good wife and pretending.
Yeah, enduring.
Sure. I was really upset about this, and the reason is because here's the person who knows more about marriage than anybody in the world, says that this is the thing that makes it great for couples. I didn't get it. Couldn't get it. So Kim says, well, could you explain it to me? And so I did. And I said, yeah, John says that the thing that keeps couples together over the long haul is an emotional relational connection at the heart during conflict. And she goes, oh, yeah. I said, oh, yeah, what? She goes, oh, you're so right about that. And I said, you get that? And she goes, yeah. I said, well, please tell me. And so she said, okay. She says, we were first married for those first 2 years. I knew you were going to leave me. And I said, honey, I've never thought of leaving you. And she goes, well, I know that now. For those first 2 years, she said, it was really difficult for me. I just knew that any moment you were going to be out the door. And I said, I don't know what to say. She says, well, again, it's not like that now. She said, but when we were first married, I would hate it when you were mad. And because you were mad, it meant you didn't love me. And because you didn't love me anymore, you were going to leave me.
Okay. I can follow that logic.
Yeah. And then she says, I still hate it when you're mad, but even when you're mad, I know you love me. And because you love me, I know you're not going anywhere. And she said, that's what he's talking about, is that an emotional, relational connection at the heart in the midst of conflict.
But that takes time to build.
It does.
Yeah, it's not an immediate thing because you have to, it's almost like you have to prove yourself in these certain areas so that they get used to, in that instance, it was, he's going to leave, he didn't leave. He's going to leave, he didn't leave. He's going to leave, he didn't leave. Oh, he's not going to leave.
Yeah.
So it kind of conditions
It does.
the other person.
And it takes time to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if one person that in the relationship has maybe had a lot of trauma, or they've had a lot of people to not be there for them over the long haul and abandonment. You know,
Sure.
so they just learned that anytime anybody's mad at me, it means they don't love me and they're just going to be gone pretty soon. So that person lives kind of on a roller coaster.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So here's the really cool thing about that. You can't manufacture E. I can't say to you, Keith, go home and create E. It can't be done. That would be the equivalent of me telling you to go home and create a tomato. You can't create a tomato. What you can do is take a tomato seed or a tomato slip, the plant, put it in the ground, water, maybe some nutrients, some sunshine, tender love and care, and then the plant grows. And then a blossom forms, and then a fruit forms, and then you can take the fruit, the tomato, and you can eat it. You didn't create the tomato. You created everything around it so that the tomato formed.
So you're responsible for creating that environment.
D, A, N, and C. D, A, N, and C. And as you continue to do those four things, E just pops out on its own.
Hope and love. But the greatest of these is love.
That's cool.
Yeah. And that was really cool when I first started hearing this material because, you know, I don't consider myself the sharpest tool in the drawer, but I'll be darned if I can't do four things. And I can do D, A, N, and C, D, A, N. I can do those four things over and over again. And what it leads to is an emotional, relational connection at the heart during the middle of conflict.
So you really didn't have to understand E anyway. It was going to happen regardless,
Exactly.
as long as you did D, A, N, and C.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the dance.
That's cool to learn to dance.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, the really great part of it is, well, a lot of great parts to it, but it's just good information that I couldn't imagine living my personal life without. And I certainly couldn't imagine doing my practice without having that information.
Oh, and that can be so helpful. You know, I think there are a lot of things there that you talked about that go across the board in relationships, and you can use it with other people that you work with, and it doesn't have to be your spouse.
No, it's really true for every relationship.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
Awesome.
So thanks so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed it and will really find it helpful. If you liked our content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click that bell so that you're notified of other videos as they come out. And make sure to
Like it. Yep. Like it, share it with your friends so that we can grow the channel and continue to put out this content for everyone.
Absolutely.
Because we're having a blast with it. We hope you are as well.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Until next time.